this video, of course, we're going to be continuing our look through the Big Finish main range of monthly adventures and talking about Red Dawn, which is the 8th release. It's written by Justin Richards, and it's a 5th Doctor story starring obviously Peter Davison, and it's got Nicola Bryant as Peri, and then you've got it's an Ice Warrior story as well. The first Big Finish Ice Warrior story, and I think this is now the second story with a returning monster from the show. Obviously last week in the Genocide Machine we had the Daleks. This week we have the Ice Warriors in Red Dawn. This was good. I think it used the Ice Warriors well. I think the Ice Warriors are an interesting baddie because they're not really baddies. I think since obviously in their first 2 appearances they are the monsters, very much in keeping with that period of the show in the late 60s. But then you get to the Curse of Peladon, where the Doctor thinks that they're the monsters and they're the bad guys, but they're not. And I think that has added a new dimension to them as a alien race in the show's history. I believe that they go back to being more villainous again in the Monster of Peladon. I've not seen that story, but the idea of them being not necessarily the monsters, and they have a very, they're very honourable. They're very that aspect of them is very interesting. It's something the new series stories, Cold War and Empress of Mars, have both used and taken advantage of. And this story definitely does that, because they're not really the villains. The villain is one of the other characters. And so the Ice Warriors, although they initially start out as somewhat villainous, you think they're going to be the villains, but they're not. They turn out not to be. So that aspect was interesting. However, I didn't feel like the main I think he's meant to be an Ice Lord. I can't remember off the top of my head the name of the guy who voiced him, but I didn't care for that performance. I think because it didn't sound, there was no effect on his voice, I don't think. And it didn't sound like the traditional Ice Warrior voice. It sounded much more like just a guy speaking with a certain inflection. But it didn't sound like an Ice Warrior. And I understand not going the full, really hissy voice from the old show, because sometimes that is a little difficult to understand. But I think the new series gets it right with Nicholas Briggs and his performance, which has an essence of the old Ice Warrior voice, but you can still hear what he's saying, So that was a little bit underwhelming. He was an interesting character, but the whole time I just felt like this voice doesn't fit for me. The other thing that I found with this is a Peri, 5th Doctor and Peri story. So set between Planet of Fire and the Caves of Androzani. And I don't know why Peri's in this. There was no reason to make it a Peri story. They talk a bit about plants and stuff because she's a botanist, but there's nothing. There's nothing in the story that calls for the companion role to be Peri, right? And maybe that's a reductive argument because the companion role is sort of whatever. Not sort of any good companion should be able to fill the companion role, but with Peri, with the Fifth Doctor and Peri especially, I think if you're gonna do a story with those two, there needs to be a good reason, because part of why the Caves of Androzani is so effective and the Fifth Doctor's death is so effective is because he sacrifices his life to save this girl that, in the context of just the show, he's only just met. He doesn't know Peri, but he's still willing to sacrifice his life to save her. When you get stories set in between those, you kind of lose that, and you lose. It wasn't that long ago when I watched the Caves of Androzani. I'm trying to recall, but I think I felt like I've not seen Planet of Fire, but in Caves, I get the sense that Peri is very new to this and is very much out of her depth and is thrown into a very dark environment. But in this story, Red Dawn, I don't know, she seems quite capable and just takes things along in her stride a little bit. I didn't find that aspect of it worked. But Nicola Brown was good, but I just didn't see why why it couldn't have been either a Sixth Doctor and Peri story or a Fifth Doctor and, I don't know, Nyssa or Turlo. Turlo would have been interesting in the situations Peri gets into in this story. I think Turlo would have been would have given it somewhat of a more interesting dynamic, but I don't know. I did also, what I will say that might be affecting my view on the story a little bit, I didn't get massive, I was struggling to fit this in during my week so I could get this review done on time, because I release them every Friday, and it was at the very end, it was the end of a long day when I started listening to this, and I was very tired, certainly for the first two parts. And I'm not saying that this story put me to sleep or anything, but it didn't. It also didn't keep me awake. I then did wake myself up a bit and actually really enjoyed the rest of the story. But certainly the first part, I struggle to recall exactly what happened in that. But it was interesting. It talked about NASA and Brookings, I think, the Brookings report, which I assume is a real thing. And the Ice Warriors were a fun presence, and it was a different kind of resolution. Yeah. But I thought it was okay. It's not the weakest that I've reviewed so far. I think it sort of lands in the middle. For me, probably lower, upper. No, what am I? It's kind of middling. It's okay, this story. And if you like Ice Warriors, check it out. But nothing spectacular. But there we are. Those are my sort of this one felt a little bit more incoherent than normal. So I hope that wasn't too much of an issue. I think I just had disparate thoughts about this story that I wanted to make sure I got them all in the video. But yes, other than that, thank you very much. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Please do like and subscribe if you haven't, and all those YouTube things. And I will see you. Well, first of all, I'll see you tomorrow or in the next few days with my reaction to the giggle. But if not, I will see you next week for the Spectre of Lanyon Moor. Thank you.